The dinner table had my grandmother's old lace tablecloth on it. My mum had ironed it that morning. I could tell because the creases were still sharp, like she pressed extra hard, trying to make everything look more put together than it was. I should have known something was off right then. I drove 40 minutes from my apartment to be there. My sister-in-law had made her famous green bean casserole, which she brings to every family gathering, and which nobody actually likes, but everyone pretends to love, because that's just how things work in my family. My brother was already there when I arrived, sitting at the head of the table like he owned the place. He kind of did, in a way. Or he acted like it. My name is Nora. I'm 31. I work as a paralegal at a mid-size firm downtown, and I have for the past 6 years. I'm not rich. I'm not struggling either. I pay my bills on time. I have a small savings account I'm proud of, and I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment 22 miles from the house I grew up in. That house is the one my parents still live in, and for 3 years I was helping to pay for it, not because they asked. Well, they did ask, eventually, but at first I offered. My dad had a knee surgery that took him out of work for 4 months, and my mum's part-time job at the school cafeteria wasn't covering the mortgage gap. I stepped in. Just temporarily, I told myself, just until Dad was back on his feet. 3 years later, I was still sending them $600 a month. The knee had healed, my dad had gone back to work. The gap didn't exist anymore, but the expectation did. I want to be clear about something. I didn't resent helping them. I resented that it became invisible. Like the money appeared in their account every month the same way the water bill got paid. Just a thing that happened that nobody talked about or acknowledged. My mum would call me to chat about her neighbour's garden. My dad would text me funny videos, and every first of the month I'd transfer the money and nobody would say a word about it. That part I minded, but I kept doing it anyway because I loved them and because I told myself that's what family does. My brother is 4 years older than me. His name is Scott. He married his wife. I'll just call her Vanessa because that's what everyone calls her, and she makes sure of it. About 3 years ago, they had a big wedding. Not big like lavish, big like chaotic. 200 people, a DJ who played the wrong songs, a seating chart disaster. My parents contributed $5,000 to it. I contributed $2,000. Scott and Vanessa contributed the drama. They moved into a rental about 30 minutes away, and for a while things were fine. Then things were not fine. I started noticing it in small ways. My mum mentioned casually that Scott had been going through a rough patch. My dad said something about how the economy is tough for young couples, which I remember thinking was interesting since Scott was 35. Then Vanessa started showing up at my parents' house more often, not with Scott, just alone, bringing food, sitting at the kitchen table for hours, laughing with my mum. I didn't think much of it at first. The night of that dinner, I walked in and the table was set with the good dishes, the lace tablecloth, handles even in the little brass holders my mum takes out for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I stood in the doorway and thought, did I forget someone's birthday? Come sit down, honey, my mum said. Her voice had that careful quality it gets when she's about to say something she's been rehearsing. My dad was already seated. Scott was next to him. Vanessa was across the table, already eating a dinner roll, and she gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We got through appetizers. We got through most of the salad. My mum kept redirecting every topic before it landed anywhere real, which meant we talked about her neighbour's new fence and Scott's fantasy football team and a documentary about dolphins my dad had watched twice. And then my dad set down his fork and folded his hands on the table in that way he has when he's settling into something serious. Nora, he said, we've been talking, your mum and we want to ask you something. I looked at him. I looked at Scott. Scott was looking at his plate. We'd like to offer you the guest room, my dad said, permanently, if you want it. I blinked. The guest room. Your old room has better light, my mum added quickly, but we figured you have your apartment, so you don't need it. And we'd like Scott and Vanessa to move in, my dad said. Straight out. No more dressing it up. They've hit a hard time. The lease on their place is ending, and they need somewhere stable while they get back on their feet. I sat very still. The guest room, for context, is 8 feet by 10 feet. It has a window that faces the side of the neighbour's garage. It contains my parents' elliptical machine, which hasn't moved in 4 years, and a pull-out couch that my cousin described as sleeping on a grid of guilt. My old bedroom is bigger, has its own closet, faces the backyard, and still has the desk where I did my homework until I left for college. Scott and Vanessa would be getting my room. I would be getting the closet with a couch. This would be temporary, my mum said. Her voice was soft, apologetic in that not quite apology way. Just while they get settled. I looked at Scott. He was still looking at his plate. Scott, I said, how long? He finally looked up. We're looking at 6 months, maybe. We just need a reset. Vanessa nodded. It's been a really difficult season for us. I wanted to ask what season, specifically. What had made it difficult? What had happened to the steady income Scott had from the logistics company he'd been with for 8 years? What had happened to Vanessa's income from the boutique marketing firm where she'd worked for almost as long? What had happened to their savings, their security deposit, their plan? I didn't ask. I said, "Can I think about it?" My mum said, "Of course." My dad said, "Of course." Vanessa refilled her water glass. I drove home that night with the window down, even though it was 44 degrees out, because I needed the cold air. I needed something to be sharp and real against my face while I tried to process what had just happened. My parents had called me to dinner to offer me a demotion in my own childhood home. They had dressed the table up with the good china to make it easier to swallow. I started paying closer attention after that. I had access to my parents' main email account. They'd given it to me years ago when my dad was recovering from surgery, and I was helping manage some of their bills and insurance paperwork. I'd never used it for anything personal. I hadn't looked through it uninvited, but after that dinner, something nagged at me. Vanessa's smile, the way she'd refilled her water glass like she'd already made herself at home, the way Scott still wouldn't look at me. I checked the account. What I found there I'm still not sure how to talk about, because part of me wishes I'd never looked. But a larger part of me is grateful I did. There were emails from Vanessa to my mum that went back 11 months. Friendly at first. Recipes, plans for getting together. Then more personal. Then something shifted in tone. Gradually, the way a current shifts underwater before the surface shows it. Vanessa talking about how stressed they were, how unfair their situation felt, how their landlord was impossible and their finances had been derailed by circumstances beyond their control. And then one email, 4 months back, where Vanessa asked my mother directly if she'd ever considered letting family contribute to the house as a way of pooling resources and staying connected. My mum had written back that she thought it was a lovely idea. That email had my dad CC'd. He'd responded with a single line, "We'll figure it out." I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and read it twice. Pooling resources, as in, Scott and Vanessa would move in and contribute financially, except that I'd been contributing financially for 3 years and nobody had used that language about my situation. I had just been sending money, like a utility payment, automatic, unremarkable. But Scott and Vanessa moving in would be a lovely idea, a pooling of resources. A family solution. I kept reading. There was an email where Vanessa mentioned offhand, casually, that she'd helped my mum set up a new savings account at a different bank. For privacy, Vanessa had written, "It's good to have a separate account just for personal things." My mum had thanked her. There was a follow-up email, 3 weeks later, where Vanessa mentioned she'd helped my mum organise some automatic transfers. I went cold. I called my mum the next morning. I kept my voice normal. I asked how she was, how Dad was sleeping, whether the leak in the upstairs bathroom had been fixed, and then I asked, carefully, if she'd been doing anything new with her banking. She said Vanessa had been so helpful, so thoughtful, she didn't know what she would have done without her. I said that was wonderful. That afternoon I called the bank. Not the new one, the one parents had been using for decades. I had power of attorney on their account, something my dad had set up when he was worried about the surgery complications 2 years ago. I had never used it for anything except confirming balances when we were managing his recovery expenses. I used it now. There had been 3 transfers in the past 2 months. Not large ones, $400, then $350, then another $400. each one to an external account, each one approved with a note that said household expenses. My parents were not big people for large amounts of cash. They didn't make large, spontaneous purchases. $400 was not nothing to them. And they had done it 3 times. I am a paralegal. I am not an attorney. But I have spent 6 years working in a field where I have seen, in documentation and depositions and careful legal language, exactly what this kind of pattern looks like. I made an appointment with one of the attorneys at my firm, not to file anything, just to understand what I was looking at. She listened to what I told her. She asked a few clarifying questions, and then she said, quietly, that what I was describing could constitute financial elder abuse, depending on how it was structured and whether my parents had consented with full understanding of what they were agreeing to. She recommended I document everything. She told me not to confront anyone yet. She said to gather what I could and come back. I spent 2 weeks gathering. I printed emails. I tracked the transfer amounts and dates. I noted the timeline, when Vanessa had first written to my mum, when the new account was opened, when the transfer started. I made a folder. I kept it at my apartment, and I kept showing up to family dinners like nothing had changed. This is the hardest part to explain, why I kept showing up. It wasn't performance exactly. It was more like I needed to be sure. I needed to watch and understand before I did anything irreversible. My parents trusted Vanessa. My brother either knew what was happening or was too checked out to see it, and I wasn't sure which was worse. If I came in swinging accusations, I would lose them before I could protect them. So I sat at their table. I ate my mum's pot roast. I watched Vanessa laugh at my dad's jokes and refill his coffee and touch my mother's arm with the particular warmth of someone who has learned exactly what warmth looks like. And I documented. The offer of the guest room was still technically open. My parents never pushed, but it existed in the air between us at every gathering. The unspoken question of whether I'd decided. The answer was forming in me slowly. Not anger, not hurt. Something clearer than both of those. A kind of resolution I hadn't expected. I was not going to move into the guest room. I was not going to keep sending $600 a month to an account that Vanessa had access to. And I was not going to let my parents be slowly hollowed out financially by someone who had figured out how to make generosity look like love. 6 weeks after that first dinner, I went back to the attorney. I bought my folder. I bought the printouts, the transaction records, the emails. I had added to it since our first meeting. I'd found 2 more transfers, and I'd found a document in my parents' shared Google Drive, something my mum had uploaded by accident, thinking it was just a scanned recipe card. That turned out to be a form designating Vanessa as a secondary contact on the new savings account. Not power of attorney, not a legal co-owner, but a contact with inquiry access. The attorney and I talked for an hour. She said the next step was a conversation with my parents. Not an accusation, not a confrontation with Scott and Vanessa, but a direct conversation with my parents where I showed them what I had found and asked them, carefully, what they understood about what they had signed. She offered to be present, if I wanted. I said I would let her know. I chose a Saturday morning. My parents always have coffee on the back porch on Saturdays when the weather is decent. I texted my mum the night before, I want to come by and spend some time with you and Dad. No occasion, just us. She said of course, she'd have pastries. Scott and Vanessa were not there when I arrived. I'd chosen the time deliberately. They'd mentioned a weekend trip. I sat down with my coffee. I looked at my mum across the little porch table, at my dad with his newspaper folded on his knee, 2 people who had raised me, who had driven me to swim practice at 6 in the morning, who had sat in the parking lot of my college orientation and cried a little, which my dad would deny until the end of time. I said, I found something I need to show you, and I need you to know that what I'm about to say comes from a place of love, not accusation. I'm not here to fight. I'm here because I'm worried about you. My dad set down his newspaper. I showed them the emails first. I watched my mum's face as she read them, the slight furrowing of her brow, the way she kept starting to say something and stopping. Then I showed them the transfer records. My dad put on his reading glasses. He looked at the dates. He looked at the amounts. We didn't authorize those, he said. His voice was very quiet. You may have, I said, as gently as I could. There was a form when you set up the new account. Sometimes there are transfer authorizations embedded in the paperwork. The question is whether you understood what you were signing. My mum had her hand over her mouth. Vanessa helped us with the forms, she said. She said it was just to keep things organized. I know, I said. We sat with that for a moment. I told them what the attorney had said. I told them there were steps they could take to protect themselves. Closing the new account, reviewing all their banking documents, revoking any access they hadn't intentionally granted. I told them the attorney could help, that it didn't have to be a legal battle if they didn't want it to be, but that they needed to understand what had happened. My mum started crying. Quietly. The kind of crying that isn't about drama, just about reality landing. My dad said, "What about Scott?" That was the hardest moment. I didn't have a clean answer. I didn't know what Scott knew. I said that honestly, that I didn't know, and that it mattered, and that it was worth finding out. I said I wasn't asking them to do anything about Scott right now. I was asking them to protect themselves first. We sat on that porch for 2 hours. By the end of it, my dad had made an appointment with his bank for Monday. My mum had decided to call their regular accountant, a man they'd used for 20 years, who she trusted completely, and I had given them the attorney's card with a note that the initial consultation was already paid for, because I had paid for it. I stopped the automatic transfer that same night. $600 a month for 3 years, $7,200 a year. I'd never made it conditional. I had never attached terms or expectations. It had been a gift, or I'd told myself it was. But I was done offering gifts to a household that had invited a stranger to help herself. The Monday bank appointment turned into 2 more appointments. The accountant found 2 additional transfers that hadn't shown up on the statements I'd pulled. Smaller amounts, older, from before I'd started looking. $560 total. Vanessa had not yet moved in. The plan had been for her and Scott to arrive at the end of the month. When my mum called Scott to tell him the move-in was off, he went quiet for a long moment and then said, "What did Nora do? Not what's wrong, not what happened. What did Nora do?" My mum told him what I had shown them. She told him about the transfers, the emails, the account. He said Vanessa told him she was helping them manage some finances. He said he'd thought it was above board. He said that several times, above board, like if he said it enough times it would start to feel true. I don't know if my brother knew exactly what was happening. I think he knew enough to not ask too many questions, and I think that's a thing he'll have to live with. Vanessa didn't take the confrontation well. There were phone calls I was not part of. There was an evening where she drove to my parents' house and my dad stood in the doorway and didn't let her pass the porch. My mum told me about her. After that, Vanessa had cried and said she'd only been trying to help, that she hadn't done anything wrong, that the family was turning on her because they'd never really accepted her. My mum had said, very quietly, "Then why does my account show 5 transfers I didn't make?" Vanessa didn't have an answer for that. The matter got turned over to an elder financial abuse advocacy organization that the attorney recommended. Not criminal filing, not yet, though the attorney said the records were strong enough to go further if my parents ever chose to. My parents chose the path that gave them the most peace, which was formal documentation, account recovery, and a request that Vanessa have no further contact with their finances. Scott and Vanessa did not get the guest room. Scott and I have not spoken much since. He texted me once, 3 weeks later, and said, "You didn't have to blow everything up." I wrote back, "I didn't blow anything up. I showed Mom and Dad what was happening to them. That's different." He didn't reply. I think he knows I'm right. I think he'll get there eventually. I hope he does. My parents are okay. They're more than okay, actually. There's a lightness to my mum I hadn't seen in months, now that the waiting room tension of whatever was coming next has been replaced by something solid and decided. She redid her kitchen cabinets with the money she recovered. She sends me photos of the handles she picked out. They're a brushed gold, which she was worried was too fancy, but I told her it was exactly right. My dad thanked me once, on a phone call that neither of us fully acknowledged was happening. He said, "You've always been the steady one." It was the most he'd ever said about what I contributed. It was the only time he'd named it. I cried a little after I hung up, which I'm not embarrassed about. I did not move into the guest room. My apartment is small and occasionally lonely, and the parking situation is genuinely terrible. But my name is on the lease, my furniture is chosen by me, my Saturday mornings are mine. I go to my parents for dinner sometimes, and now it's different. Now when I walk in, my mum hugs me a little longer, and my dad makes sure to ask about my work, my life, my things, like he remembers they exist. It's not perfect. Nothing is perfect. But I am not a utility payment anymore. I am not the thing that shows up automatically every month and gets taken for granted. I am their daughter. The one who showed up with a folder and a cup of coffee and the truth at the table on the back porch on a Saturday morning when the weather was decent, and if that's the most I ever get from them in the way of acknowledgement. My dad saying I was the steady one, my mum sending pictures of gold cabinet handles, then I'm finding out that it's enough. I am 31 years old. I stopped waiting for permission to take my own life seriously, and the day I sat down on that porch and said I found something I need to show you, I felt something lift out of me that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. I think it was the hope that they would notice what I was doing for them. I didn't need them to notice any more. I had shown them that was different, that was mine, and I was ready to go home. I used to think that being a good daughter meant being a quiet one, that showing up reliably, financially, without complaint was its own kind of language, and that eventually people would learn to read it. They didn't. And I don't think that was cruelty. I think it was just the nature of things that go unquestioned, they continue. The money moved every month. Nobody said thank you. Nobody said anything, and so the silence became the agreement. I had accepted terms I'd never actually signed. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of it now, is that what happened in my family wasn't unusual. It didn't require villains, though Vanessa came close. Mostly it required ordinary human tendencies, the tendency to take steady things for granted, to trust warmth over evidence, to let someone helpful slowly become someone necessary. My parents didn't do anything out of malice. Neither, maybe, did Scott, not entirely. But none of that made what was happening okay, and none of it meant I had to stand there and watch it unfold. There's a thing I kept thinking about during those weeks when I was gathering documents and going to meetings and sitting at Sunday dinners pretending everything was normal. I kept thinking, the cost of doing nothing is real, even when it's invisible. Every month I didn't say anything. $600 went somewhere I couldn't trace. Every dinner I sat through without speaking, the situation got more entrenched. Inaction has consequences just as much as action does. They're just slower, quieter, easier to miss until you can't. That's what I want people to hear when they hear Nora's story. Not the dramatic part, not the folder and the attorney and the confrontation on the porch, though all of that mattered. I want them to hear the 2 years before any of that happened. The years when I was paying and not asking questions. The years when I told myself it was fine, it was temporary, it was family. The quiet cost of waiting. The intelligence part, the part that actually protected my parents, wasn't dramatic either. It was just paying attention, reading carefully, asking one question: what does this pattern look like over time? I'm a paralegal. I know how to read documents. But I almost didn't use that skill because it felt intrusive, felt like distrust. What changed my mind was understanding that seeing something clearly and refusing to look at it are both choices. One of them protects people, one of them doesn't. And the character part, the courage part, was the porch. Sitting down with my parents and saying out loud, I found something I need to show you. Not with anger, not with accusation, just with the truth, laid flat on the table between us, and the willingness to let them respond however they were going to respond. That was the hardest morning of my life, and also, looking back, the one I'm most proud of. I stopped the transfer. I called the lawyer. I showed up on a Saturday with pastries and a folder and everything I'd found, and I went home that night as someone who had finally, after 31 years, stopped making herself invisible in order to keep the peace. The peace was never mine to keep. It never is, when you're the only one trying to hold it together. Take care of yourself first, then take care of the people you love, in that order, because you cannot protect anyone from a position of quiet erasure. I learned that the hard way. I'm glad I learned it when I did.